Welcome to Scoolinary, the online cooking school that transforms people and connects cultures. You will learn with the best chefs in the industry, and you will discover the broadest online catalog of topics related to gastronomy. We publish new courses every week. In our podcast, we have coffee with a chef every week. Each of them will tell us about their experience and their vision for the culinary world to help you better understand this exciting industry. Come on, join us for coffee. So today we are joined by Mason Hereford, chef, entrepreneur, and prime example of work-life balance in the kitchen. Some of you may know Mason as the founder of Turkey and the Wolf, voted the best new restaurant in the U.S. in 2017. Others may recognize him from the Battle Street Food episode of Iron Chef, where he championed the fans with his irreverent signature style. If you haven't yet heard of Mason Hereford, here's your chance to learn how a food that you eat with your hands that's accessible to pretty much everyone has become the ultimate medium for Mason's playful creativity. Hi, Mason. Welcome, and thanks for joining us for coffee.
Hi, Wendy. It's great to be here.
Great. Before we begin, are you a coffee drinker?
I'm not a coffee drinker, but I do drink an obscene amount of sweet tea here in the South in America.
So because we have an international audience, and personally, I'm from the Northeast, can you describe what sweet tea is?
It's basically this horrifyingly sweet version of black tea over ice with with enough sugar in it that it's almost like a simple syrup.
Okay. I've had it before, and it is everything you just said, and it is delicious.
But for the record, I do tamp it down with a little bit of unsweetened tea. I don't go full Southern sweetness because that could be problematic if I were to drink it every day.
So, if you would please, can you tell us in your own words who you are and where you're from? We'd just like to give our listeners a chance to get to know you a little bit better.
Sure. So as you mentioned, my name is Mason. I live in New Orleans. That's where I'm at now in my living room with my beautiful wife in the next room and my wonderful dog. I've got 3 restaurants in New Orleans. The one that you mentioned is called Turkey and the Wolf. It opened in 2016. It's a sandwich shop. And then a couple years after that, we opened our breakfast restaurant, which is called Molly's Rise and Shine. And it kind of takes the similar ideas that we had about food and running restaurants and applies that to more of a breakfast concept. And then this past year, about 8 months ago, we opened Hungry Eyes, which is our dinner restaurant. It's got a bit of an 80s theme in design. And we're referring to it as luxury drinking food to go with the sort of 80s martinis and natural wine program that we have there. And beyond that, I grew up on rollerblades in Virginia, eating at gas stations until I graduated school and learned how to cook.
Early in your career, you drove around the country and staged at a few different restaurants with a focus on sandwiches. Why sandwiches?
Short answer would be sandwiches are the best. But there was also sort of like a time and place for me that made going into opening my own restaurant and that restaurant being a sandwich shop make a lot of sense from my perspective. Having grown up in Virginia, but having learned how to cook in New Orleans, I grew up in a city that had a lot of sandwich shops, and those sandwich shops were anywhere from a deli to sort of a place with a dozen house sandwiches that all sort of had like a slight creativity behind them, or like their own flair. And then I moved to that's probably the bulk of my eating out diet in school in Virginia and growing up in Virginia. And then moving to New Orleans and learning how to cook and seeing this vibrant sandwich culture in New Orleans being famous for the po' boy sandwich, which is oftentimes fried seafood on French bread. We call them dressed, which means what toppings they have on them. And then there's also famous for the muffalata, which is like a cold cut and olive sandwich on a big sesame seed um, roll that you kind of slice almost like pizza.
Mm.
And I loved the sandwiches in New Orleans, and I loved to continue my life as a sandwich eater. But I realized there's not a lot of these types of sandwich shops that I grew up with, which are just sandwiches, not necessarily New Orleans style or New Orleans inspired. And having run restaurants and being the chef of one restaurant in particular for many years, and occasionally for our more casual lunches, putting sandwiches on our lunch menu, I realized that if I were going to move on and open my own restaurant, a sandwich shop was an obvious choice for me because it was more or less my favorite food. New Orleans had a spot for that hadn't been filled yet, other than perhaps a deli or two. And yeah, when I embarked on the road to travel around the country with my small bit of savings at the time, I decided that I should focus on sandwich shops when I staged at restaurants.
Well, you just said something interesting. I don't think New Orleans is the only place with that void to fill, but I want to hear your opinion. Is there kind of a sandwich capital of the United States or a sandwich region of the United States that actually has that kind of in the culture?
I somehow have never been to Philadelphia, but that's the first one that pops in my mind.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But the
Hmm.
Northeast in general, I feel like is sandwich land. New York,
Oh, yeah.
is definitely one. Otherwise, in America, what are the other sandwichy places? Oh, Chicago is another good one. I think these big urban centers definitely are
Oh,
sandwich
yeah.
places.
So you've already mentioned you have three restaurants in New Orleans under your belt, and you have a about this course video that goes with your Scoolinary course called Flavor Pack Sandwiches. So in that video, you reveal some of your sandwich theory. What you did is you asked three excellent questions. They are, how are we going to make the most fun? How are we going to skip unnecessary steps? I'm sure a lot of people will really be interested in that, and how are we going to make big flavors with less work? So, how did these three questions emerge as guiding principles in your restaurants?
I think it sort of now that you lay it out there like that, I didn't even realize that we had planned the course in such a way, but those are really the guiding principles. I think that my career just led me in that direction. So as I learned how to cook and learned a bunch of different things, and then started to focus my professional growth around, sort of what my intuitive culinary voice might be. That's just where I landed, and I think part of that is grows just from my personality and my interests. Fun being a huge one, and not doing unnecessary work being another one. Um, yeah, I think it just sort of organically evolved uh, as I learned how to cook and I learned how to run restaurants and I learned how to manage. I think it just happened. And when I sat down to write my cookbook, which is also, shares the same ethos as this course, those guiding principles began to emerge. And then I said, oh yeah, this is the perspective I want to instruct from.
Yeah, so it's a good point. So whether doesn't matter what medium I think you're in, whether it's television, it's podcasts, it's videos, or it's a culinary course or it's a cookbook, playful, fun, those seem to be in everything. There, that's the undercurrent um, to, I think, your style. Fun seems to be vital to your restaurants. Can you tell us how you interpret and adapt fun to your businesses?
Yes, I can do that. Um, the whole point when we opened with a really small team, and we didn't realize we were going to be making any waves in the industry or anything like that. And we sort of it was well, it started as a group of friends, and that helps a lot. A lot of people who were working at sort of higher end restaurants, or maybe consider higher echelon restaurants in the city, often in positions of management, sous chefs, chefs, managers. Our opening crew was made up a lot of those people, and we were sort of looking to escape the things we had discovered in the industry that just felt like too much of a grind. And we were like, hey, let's do this one our way. Let's center our ability to have a good time as much as we do that for our customers. And let's make sure we're taking care of ourselves in a way that we're just a little bit more comfortable. There's a little bit less rules. And I don't mean to say that it's not still a restaurant. It's still a very stressful job, and it still has certain demands that need to be met. But we just wanted to shift the conversation a little bit internally to how can we have fun, have a few less rules, and get this done. And as a group, we figured out what that meant. You know, there's some stress tests in there where we took it too far and we were a little bit too loose. There's times when we realized we were doing some stuff that was a little bit less focused on that idea that this is all about fun. And it has evolved where we make decisions as a group and we try to take into account our ability to show each other a good time sort of at every turn as we make decisions as a company.
Hmm. Yeah. And so far that works out. I mean, you can't have a business unless it turns a profit, to boil it down to its
Well, it
lowest.
doesn't always.
Yeah, well,
But
yeah.
at least we're having fun.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you can strike that balance, then I think you're doing all right. So, your first restaurant, Turkey and the Wolf, which we've mentioned, opened in 2016. Can you tell us what's behind the name?
Yeah, I can. It's often a longer story than it is an interesting one, but I'll keep it brief. I named the restaurant a few years before we opened. I actually had a Turkey and the Wolf Instagram account probably 3 years before we served our first sandwich because I knew the name. By the time the restaurant rolled around, I probably like was over the name, but I had told so many people in my life and around New Orleans that I was opening a restaurant called Turkey and the Wolf that it was definitely no turning back. But it was right in the heart of every restaurant in America, maybe internationally. I don't remember. I don't know for sure. But I guess restaurants with English names, they all had "and" in them. It was like this and that and this and that. And by the time the restaurant rolled around, I realized that I fell squarely in this "and" trend of restaurant names, and I was like, "Well, it's too late. Got to roll with it." Um, Regardless,
Okay.
the ands I chose were turkey and the wolf. The word turkey just came from my love for my old man. My father used to call us turkeys when were little. You know,
Yeah.
I think kind of evolved from like the jive turkey type the thing people used to say in like the I don't know 20s or 30s or something.
Yeah.
Um, and I always thought that was funny, and I carried that with me as I got older. And as I started to be in charge of things in the kitchen, I'd occasionally call people turkeys because it reminded me of my dad. And then for the wolf, at that same formative time in my career, I was dating a woman named Lauren, which is funny because it's also my wife's name. Uh, and she was very into wolves. She just thought wolves were the best animal. And I sort of ran with that. So anytime I would buy her a gift, it was sort of a wolf themed gift. And then in the kitchen, came up with this narrative of like, you know, if you were doing a good job, it was more wolf like. And if you were messing up, it was like more you were a turkey. And it's like, are you going to be a turkey or a wolf today? And then at the end of the night, when we were putting up our last dishes after a hard night, maybe a Friday, we'd all take a shot and then howl as if we were howling at the moon, which in retrospect is a bit embarrassing. But at the time, it was sort of this cute thing. And then when I said, "Hey, I think I'm going to open a restaurant called Turkey and the Wolf," early on in my management career, uh, everyone's like, "If you don't call the restaurant that, you have failed us." And so it
Okay.
was too late to go back. The name has served us well, but it's just funny that it was so many years before we even opened that we found the name, and by the time we were ready to open, I was over the name.
Well, in the brief search that I did online, I don't think you'll have any problems with copyright infringement anytime soon. It's distinct. Uh,
I appreciate that.
I keep dwelling on Turkey and the Wolf because it's really present. Uh, is the interior is really eclectic, and I was wondering if you could take us on an audio tour of your restaurant.
Sure. You are correct that it is eclectic. it sort of looks like the inside of my house, but like a little bit more falling down. It's sort of maximalist, but it didn't start that way. It has been a collection of things over the 7, 8 years, 7.5 years. We've been open, and it began um, with furniture. We had to have tables and chairs. And so the year leading up to opening Turkey and the Wolf, I would visit my mother in Virginia, and we'd go to thrift stores and these sort of like old roadside antique shops outside, near within an hour of where she lives in central Virginia, out in rural areas. And we slowly gathered, 7 or 8 tables, all sort of formica top, often with the like chrome around it. Not quite diner, but just sort of busted up old formica, and chairs. Just any mismatched chair that could work. Some of the chairs were even from my mom's grandfather's old soda shop, so they were falling apart. And we put everything in. So my mom actually strapped everything to the back of her broken down old pickup truck to the point where it was maybe 15 feet above, like 15 feet high, so probably almost 10 feet above like the cab of the truck. Just tons of ropes and tie down straps. And she recruited her sister to drive down with her, maybe even behind her, I don't know, to make sure that nothing fell off the truck. And they brought it all down, maybe 6 or 8 months before Turkey and the Wolf opened. And that stuff lived in my apartment with me, and the woman that I was dating who was into wolves. And we had to like squeeze between it to get anywhere in our apartment for many months until we finally got it in there. And then that was the beginning of this idea that everything was just pulled from a million different directions and from our loved ones to create filler in the space to make it so that there's stuff to look at. And that's kind of continued. Also, the first decoration in the place was my older brother Will, who's a photographer. He also shot my cookbook. He's done a lot of other cookbooks, but he's also a travel and fashion photographer, a successful one. And we went around to my favorite places to eat in New Orleans 2 weeks before Turkey and the Wolf opened, and we took photos of my favorite dishes, and we framed those, and then those were the first 10 pictures on the walls of Turkey and the Wolf, and that was it. So this old formica tables, busted up old chairs, none of which match, and then 10 pictures that my brother took of all some of the best bites in New Orleans from my perspective. Since then, as you walk around the yeah, it was fun idea, but it was a little bit sparse at first, but only out of necessity. There, we opened the restaurant on a shoestring budget, about $60,000, which, if you know anything about restaurants, that's about 1/10 of the average for a restaurant of its size. Um, it was a real struggle at first to like, because all the equipment was breaking, and we were just figuring it out as we went. From there, I started to just add things from the our add things to the walls. The first thing I did was I realized that 2, 3 weeks in, when I had come up for air, realizing the opening menu was a little bit more set. I needed to do something to make it a little more decorated. So I took every single picture out of my apartment, which was probably about 30, and there's one hallway, and covered the hallway like almost floor to ceiling with pictures. And then I was like, here we go. Now we've got something to look at. And that has sort of just continued to happen. So now there's just stuff everywhere. The walls are covered. People will drop off, somebody dropped off a stuffed badger that's sitting around somewhere. And now it's like a very sort of bric-a-brac maximalist stuff shoved in every corner, but coming from a lot of different friends and family, and it's just, I don't know, a lived in and loved in space.
The last check, I think you were taking us on an audio tour of Turkey and the Wolf, and you were to the point where you were describing the shoestring budget you you started Turkey on the Wheel. That's amazing. 60,000. That's crazy. I guess and that's
Well, I mean, over the course of the next year, we would go on to spend a lot more than that. That's how we got the doors open, though, because that's all we had.
right. But to launch a restaurant or open a restaurant on that amount, that's impressive. So, how did traffic start coming in the door? Because things move pretty quickly for you.
Well, we were coming soon for a long time, so we were able to get on some of these lists that say, "Hey, look out for these upcoming restaurants on Eater.com or in the local food section of the newspaper that is also on the internet." They'd say, "Hey, get ready for this." So you get some eyes on your business that way, and then I'd gained some low amount of notoriety from being the chef of a restaurant that was doing well for a few years before that. So everybody I knew in the entire city showed up that first couple weeks, and then word of mouth and social media advertising and just whatever it is. We didn't start really hitting our stride till about 1 year in, but that
Hmm.
first year we were really lucky to get some pretty important accolades that sort of kept us relevant and exciting and in front of new viewership. And then at the end of our first year, like right on the 1 year mark, Bon Appetit voted us whatever it is the best new restaurant in
Yeah.
America, and we immediately got a line out the door from that. So that was pretty epic.
Right. And then not too long after that, although that was in 2017. And then in 2022, you published your cookbook, which you brought up earlier, called Turkey and the Wolf Trippin'. I'm sorry, Turkey and the Wolf Flavor Trippin' in New Orleans or New
True.
Orleans. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that book.
Yeah. So it touches on a little bit of what we were talking about earlier, which is also the course. There's a section on sandwiches, but it actually goes a little bit more broad. So there's one chapter about sandwiches amongst, 6 or 7 other chapters, and similar ideas of sort of irreverent cooking, not necessarily following the rules, ditching unnecessary steps, and creating really big bold flavors, but focusing more on the grocery store and your own pantry as your base ingredients rather than some of these other more chef driven cookbooks that
Mhm.
ask you to source more esoteric ingredients.
What's a good example of a recipe from your book?
A good example of a recipe for my book. I don't have it in front of me and I don't remember anything that I wrote, but uh, let's see. Well, let's say, so an example, the Bel Air sandwich that we cook in the course and in the book. It's
Mhm.
one of those things we painstakingly made our own ham for a good push at Turkey and the Wolf. We thought it was important to show people what we could accomplish. We loved the love and the work that we put into this product to create ham for our own ham sandwiches. And I could tell that story in the book, and I could teach the reader how to make ham from scratch. But at the end of the day, we're trying to accomplish a lot of things as chefs at Turkey and the Wolf. And there are people out there whose entire job it is to make ham, and their ham is better than mine. So why would I ask you to embark on a 2 day process? Well, more like 8 day process if you include how long you need to brine the ham, but a 2 day process to cook the ham and do all this work when I can just teach you how to layer the flavors of the sandwich, and you can buy some of the best ham in the world made by people who you know, take ham as their raison d'etre
Yeah.
uh, rather than this guy whose real job it is to layer flavors. I'm not the best ham creator in the world, even though I'm proud that I know how to make it. And an example would be, let's not talk about how to make the ham. Let's talk about how to source ham, or just take your favorite ham and how to make that into a sandwich that's dynamic, interesting, and can be accomplished quickly.
Yeah, I think that layering flavors is really fundamental to your style and also to your Scoolinary course for sure, and your inventiveness. it seems like it's knows no bounds. However, you did learn early on not to switch up the menu too much, since a lot of your sandwiches develop a fan following. And but you do, however, add specials and bring back holiday sandwiches throughout the year. Uh, right now, we're speaking in mid-January. Super Bowl is coming up. What's a good example of a holiday sandwich?
So yes, holidays and seasonality. There's a couple sandwiches that bounce back when a certain ingredient comes into season. An obvious one would be tomato season here in New Orleans. And I show you how to make a tomato sandwich in the course. It's one of my favorite sandwiches ever, and it's also one of the easiest. The sort of the less the least investment is required on the from the standpoint of the viewer. Another one is every year around Thanksgiving holiday in America, we generally take one or multiple of the classic holiday sides that you might eat at Thanksgiving or Christmas here, and we create a sandwich around that, and it's different every year. A lot of people think with the name Turkey and the Wolf that we make a lot of turkey sandwiches, which we do not. So every once in a while, that's the one time a year that we actually have turkey on our menu, if we even go that route. This year for the Thanksgiving sandwich, we we made a green bean casserole into a grilled cheese, and we made this sort of cheesy green bean casserole, and it's sort of like flowing off the edges um, and of the red, and that went over really well. But it didn't have turkey on it at all this year. And then some years it'll be the sort of that classic sandwich that you always see people making the day after Thanksgiving, which is, the five sides and the cranberry
Yeah.
sauce all layered on something, and then what we'll do from there is we'll taste it and then we'll tweak it over and over again until it's truly something balanced and more exciting than just happenstance of available casseroles tossed on top of each other. We'll rarely ever do something that is just based on nostalgia or playfulness without like really tweaking it until as a group we've all signed off on the flavor being sort of maximally tuned in.
Tell me more about the green bean casserole sandwich, please. I want to know what went
We
into that.
ran it for one day. I might have to pull out my phone here and look on my Instagram to see exactly what it was, because it came together really quickly and we only ran it maybe for 2 days. But seeing as Thanksgiving wasn't that long ago, oh, here it is. So it was one of the chefs was attempting to do that sort of layered sandwich,
Yeah.
where we made a bunch of different Thanksgiving style holiday sides, and we were going to figure out how to stack them in a way to create a sandwich. And he went all vegetarian. So instead of turkey, or instead of ham, he took portobello mushrooms and he brined them as if they were ham, and he smoked them. And he had this really complicated, interesting sandwich. And as we tasted it, we realized that it might not be possible for us to accomplish what we were intending to accomplish with so many sort of intricate flavor combinations. So we sort of took the one thing that was speaking to us the most, which was the green bean casserole, and then we took a sharp English cheddar and a bunch of Gruyere, and we folded it in. And because he already had a bechamel as the base of his green bean casserole, it sort of
Mhm.
turned into a Mornay sauce, and the cheese was incorporating as like a gravy really easily. And then on top, we marinated onions in a habanero hot sauce that we make, and then
Mhm.
fried it so they're spicy and crispy. So there's a big pile of those on top, and then on
Oh,
the side we had an herb mayonnaise spiked with just a little bit of cranberry, more for acid than for sweetness.
yeah.
And then that was the sandwich for the day. And looking here, it got way more engagement than an average post. So I guess it went over pretty well.
Well, it's funny because it gets a lot of shade, if you will, at Thanksgiving time. It's like green bean
Sure.
casserole with the canned cream soup and the canned fried onions, and it sounds like you've boosted
Well,
that to a new
he made a
level.
duck cell and then folded into a bechamel, and it was
Oh yeah,
all chefed out a little bit.
Yeah, that I mean, green bean casserole might not interest a lot of people, but that sandwich for sure does.
It was also
Um,
a good. It was a good picture. You know, the
yeah,
people they eat with their eyes too.
that's true. And you said it. Your course features a bunch of fun sandwich recipes like visualize world peas on toast and not yo mama's peanut butter bacon burger. I already mentioned that I made that for lunch today, a variation. So, how do you develop your creations?
There's a few ways. The two dishes you just mentioned actually touch on two of the ways that we develop our creations. A lot of times it's a team effort. I certainly don't want to take credit for all of Turkey and the Wolf's food because we're a group and we really like to bounce ideas off of each other and sort of take something that somebody is working on and then somebody else adds to it, and then in the end we can all sort of agree on what the best path forward to a final creation is. But a lot of times it comes from nostalgia, something that you grew
Yeah.
up eating, or something that you ate in another city you lived in, or something that you wish that you could eat right now but don't have access to, and it like exists in your memories. So that's a key one. Another one would just be classic inspiration. You had
Hmm.
something, you loved it, you're inspired. It's time to make it yourself because you can't live without it.
Yeah.
Um, a funny one that often pops up is a pun. If you say, uh, these words go together so well, we have to make it into a dish, and that one's a little bit more strong arming it, and then finessing it to make two things that seemingly would be out of place but sound so funny together. That sometimes a pun is what makes it. Visualize world peas would be
Yeah.
a bit of a pun, um, because instead there used to be bumper stickers that said "Visualize world peace"
Yeah.
um, growing up, and then um, yeah. So these two sandwiches. So visualize world peas. We said, hey, we need to make a dish of chopped up peas and mix them with something. And it was about around the time I was recipe testing for our breakfast restaurant, and we knew we wanted to do some open faced tartine style dishes there. And we basically chopped up a bunch of peas, folded in like a salsa verde of sorts, and then just sort of like went at it as a team, figured out what it needed until it came up with sort of like a whipped feta, a salsa verde chopped pea situation with just a ton of herbs on top, and is bright and refreshing. Along the way, we discovered that if you cure the peas in salt and sugar, it really brings out their flavor. And then eventually it became one of the opening dishes for Molly's Rise and Shine. So that's one that just started with a name. And then the Not Yo Mama's peanut butter burger is based on this burger shop. So I guess a bar in downtown New Orleans, in the French Quarter area of New Orleans, that had a series of burgers, but there was one burger that clearly reigned supreme in the eyes of many hungry drinkers, and that was the peanut butter bacon burger. The first time I had it, I simply could not believe that somebody had put peanut butter on a burger,
Yeah.
and much less that I was sitting there enjoying it, like very much so enjoying it because I was a night of imbibing, and um, I just couldn't believe it. I ate it for years. It eventually closed down, and then during the quarantine part of the pandemic, or the sort of coming out of that, when we weren't a very busy restaurant, we needed to add hours to make sure that all of our team had, was able to get their paychecks. So we started a burger and hot dog pop up, and other than a classic cheeseburger, the first thing we put on the menu was the Not Yo Mama's peanut butter burger, in homage to that burger we used to eat after long nights of drinking. If
Oh,
we somehow found our way to the French Quarter, which is not a normal thing we do.
nice. It's a nice story behind that.
Thank you.
Are there any rules that cannot be broken when it comes to sandwiches?
Are there any rules that cannot be broken? I mean, no. I mean, that would sort of be against my sandwich religion to say that there's rules that can't be broken. But I would say there are certain things that we almost always do when we're making sandwiches that have become pretty integral to our operation and our creations. Um, I assume you want examples.
That was
So
my next
as I
question.
say
Yeah.
that, I should think of these things. A good example is when we make toast, specifically toast that's cut to a certain thickness, thicker toast. If you make toast and you take it right off of the toasting vessel or instrument, uh, and you build a sandwich and it hasn't had time to sort of air out, breathe, rest, if you will.
Mhm.
A lot of times when you throw the ingredients right on there, the bread will steam because like the heat's locked in, and then the toasted bread will be a little bit soggier and not really have the structural integrity required to put ingredients on it and hold like stay together.
Oh, okay.
So for toast, we always rest our toast if it's cut at a certain thickness. Thinner toast tends to stay crisp without
Hmm.
having to do that.
Yep.
But that's like a good example of if you make a sandwich, you get your bread hot, you throw everything on there. Sometimes it's flabby, and so we've taken to always resting our toast, and we like a lot of toast. And some sandwiches are not toasted, and there's you got to kind of consider textures when you're deciding whether or not to toast your bread.
Hmm. Yeah, I had a disagreement that I'd like it if you would weigh in on it. My sandwich attitude has always been that mustard gets spread on the bread. Well, here it is really. I think mustard goes on one slice of bread, and that's where you put your non water soluble ingredients. And then on the other side of the bread, the other slice of bread, you put mayonnaise. And that's where, if you're going to put that on top, that's where you put your tomato, your lettuce, things that might be a little damp. And so you have that kind of impermeable, well, it's not impermeable, that water barrier that's formed by the mayonnaise. But the disagreement is this. So I think that mustard gets spread on bread, but my friend Conrad, he insists that mustard goes on the meat slices. What's your opinion?
Well, Conrad's wrong, but also uh, I think you do make good points about the mayonnaise and the mustard performing a duty as a barrier or whatever, or specifically you said, I guess, the mayonnaise. I also really always like to have my mayonnaise touching lettuce or my sauce touching if there's a component, a salady undressed component. I like to pair it with the sauce so that it sort of dresses it sometimes,
Yeah.
or that's something I consider sometimes. That's not in every situation. Also, who spreads mustard on meat? What is that? I've never heard of this. This makes no sense. Um, the so if you the meat can move around, and the bread is often square. The bread is the outer layer of the sandwich. It's oftentimes the edge of the sandwich, and as you eat a sandwich, like we're very big on applying our sausage, as we say, edge to edge, corner to corner. If you leave a part of the bread without sauce on it, you are creating a bite for yourself that doesn't is incomplete.
Oh.
So
Hmm.
if the meat isn't exactly the size of your bread, and you put the sauce on just the meat, you are risking eating bread without sauce. That
Huh.
sounds incorrect. So I'm gonna
That's a
have to side with you
crime.
on this one. Sorry, Conrad. If I ever meet you, we can hash it out in person. But I agree with you.
All right. I will point him in the direction of this podcast and say, "See,
There you go.
so you've gotten to meet and work with many people who share your love of cooking. Who would you recommend for a future episode of this podcast?"
Man, that's a good question. Chefs. It sounds like the question is who are some chefs that you're extremely excited about right now in this moment?
Yeah.
Or at least that's how I'm hearing it. And I would answer that, Justin from Anajac Thai, outside of LA, is someone who is like exploding at the moment and is such a fun, quirky, witty, smart chef doing something really, really amazing. He um, took over his father's Thai restaurant and has since turned it into one of the hottest, if not the hottest, restaurant in this moment in the LA metropolitan area. Tim and Jeannie from Kasama in Chicago, first Filipino restaurant ever to get a Michelin star. They also just won the James Beard Award for that region this year. I've eaten their restaurant every time I've been to Chicago in the last few visits, and I've had the pleasure of cooking with them, and I just am completely inspired by them. So that would be one that, if possible, I would recommend.
Okay.
And there's countless others, but I'll start with those two.
Cool.
Three technically, because there's
Justin, Tim, and Jeannie. Cool. Thanks. Wrote them all
yeah.
down. Well, that's it for what I have to ask you. I mean, I could probably ask you a lifetime of questions. It's been really interesting speaking with you today. So, thank you, Mason, for taking the time to have a sweet tea with us today. New one for me, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Wendy. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you guys including me.
If you like this episode, don't miss an episode by becoming a member. We're waiting for you each week with more guests. We're on all podcast platforms. Just search for Coffee with Scoolinary. We're also waiting for you at our website and on our social networks, where you can get to know all our courses and teachers.